Nobody in my community ever told me what would happen if I did not get pregnant. There was no conversation, no warning. No woman pulled me aside before the wedding and said, "If your body does not do what it is supposed to do, here is what comes next." She did not need to say it because I had already watched it happen. I had watched the way the community shifted around a woman whose belly stayed flat past the first autumn. The way the questions at Sunday dinner stopped being curious and became careful. The way her husband started volunteering for longer barn work. The way the other wives stopped inviting her to quilting circles where they discussed names and nurseries. I watched all of it before it happened to me. And when it happened to me, I recognized every single stage. The way you recognize a disease you have seen take someone else. I was standing at my kitchen window when I understood. November. First frost on the glass. My husband already in the barn. The house so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the next room. What I am about to explain to you is not written in any ordnung. No bishop has ever preached it from any pulpit. But every married woman inside my former community understood it before she could have put language to it. She understood it in her body, in the way her stomach tightened when someone asked how long she had been married. My name is Rachel, and for a long time, my worth was measured by a biological clock I couldn't control. If you have ever felt that heavy, suffocating pressure of trying to meet expectations that were never spoken aloud, or if you know what it's like to feel your own identity slowly eroding just to keep the peace, you are not alone. Have you ever experienced a moment where you realized the people around you loved who you were supposed to be, rather than who you actually were? Tell me if you've been there. I invite you to subscribe to this channel right now, because every person who hears this testimony becomes part of a vital record, and the record matters. Stay with me, because I need to tell you how the system works before I can tell you what it did to me. To understand how I ended up freezing at that kitchen window, you have to look at the blueprint we are handed from birth. In our community, life did not move by individual choices. It moved by seasons, predictable as the corn harvest. You turn 18. You take your vows before the church, and you marry. My husband, Levi, was a good man by all accounts. Strong-shouldered, quiet, a man who could handle a team of horses with a light touch. When we married on a crisp, clear Thursday in November, the air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Our new home was a small farmhouse with white painted floors and windows that rattled when the north wind blew. The rules of our life were not written down in books. They were carried in the air we breathed. A woman's place was the home, but more specifically, it was the cradle. We were taught that the ultimate fulfillment of a woman's faith was to be a mother. Children were called the heritage of the Lord. But the unwritten flip side of that doctrine was terrifying. If children are a sign of God's favor, then an empty womb is a silent, ongoing trial. A sign of something unresolved between you and the Creator. The trouble began slowly, during our first spring. The ground was thawing, turning to thick brown mud, and the community was waking up from the winter lull. Every Sunday after church, the family gathered at my mother-in-law's long oak table. The room was always hot, thick with the smell of roasted pork, fresh yeast rolls, and the damp wool of Sunday coats drying by the stove. 6 months now, Rachel, my mother-in-law said one afternoon, her voice soft as she handed me a heavy ceramic bowl of mashed potatoes. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They dropped instantly to my apron string, checking the knot, looking for any slight swell in the fabric. Sarah Miller is already expecting her first. They married a month after you. The table went entirely still. The only sound was the scraping of Levi's fork against his plate. "We are praying for it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I forced my lips into a polite, compliant smile. My face felt rigid like wood. "Good," she replied, nodding slowly. "God hears the prayers of a submissive heart." Levi didn't look up from his plate. He just reached for the butter, his knuckles white against the knife. "We've got plenty of work to keep us busy until then," he muttered. Outwardly, I was the perfect Amish wife. I nodded. I served the food. I cleared the heavy stoneware plates, and I murmured the correct humble phrases. I kept my head bowed during the long German prayers, my hands folded tightly in my lap so no one could see them shaking. But inside, a cold panic was beginning to take root. Every month, my body brought the same devastating proof that the prayers weren't working. I remember the suffocating weight of those moments in the dark. I would lie perfectly still in our bed, listening to the rhythmic, heavy breathing of my husband beside me. The room smelled of the lavender soap I used to wash the sheets, and the faint, earthy scent of the barn that always clung to Levy's hair. He didn't touch me on those nights. The silence between us wasn't just quiet. It was an active, growing barrier. He never yelled. He never accused me. But his withdrawal was heavier than anger. It was the absolute certainty that I was failing at the one thing I had been brought into his house to do. I would stare up at the shadows, the moon cast through the window panes, onto the ceiling, my hands pressed flat against my stomach, trying to bargain with God. Take away my rest, take away my health. Just give me a child, I whispered into the dark. I felt like a cracked vessel, a broken link in a chain that stretched back for generations, and the whole weight of the community's quiet scrutiny was pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe with each passing week. By the second winter, the silence in our house had frozen solid. I had become an expert in avoiding the glances, but you cannot avoid a climate. I remember walking to the local dry goods shop in the piercing January cold, the snow crunching like broken glass under my boots. I ran into an older woman from the upper district. Martha, a woman known for her quiet wisdom and the 10 children she had raised. She looked at my pale face, wrapped tightly in my black wool shawl, and she didn't ask the usual probing questions. She just reached out, her rough, calloused thumb brushing a stray flake of snow from my cheek. "Rachel," she said, her voice dropping so low it was almost lost to the wind. A tree that yields no fruit is still used for timber, but it never forgets the axe that waits at its roots. That phrase stayed with me, cutting deeper than any sermon. It illuminated the hidden essence of my reality. My community did not view my childlessness as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a stubborn refusal to grow. Looking back now from the height of my lived years, having finally escaped that suffocating landscape, I see the absolute psychological trap I was in. The emotional price I paid was nothing less than the erasure of my own humanity. To everyone else, the rules were just, the expectations were normal, and the surveillance was born of neighborly care. But to me, it was a slow, agonizing trial where I was both the accused and the executioner. The system demanded that I blame myself, and I complied completely. I spent hours scanning my memories, convinced that some hidden flaw in my faith, some fleeting moment of pride as a young girl, had caused God to close my womb. The price was an absolute, devastating loneliness. I was surrounded by people every day, at church, at frolics, at family dinners, yet I was entirely isolated. My body had become a public failure, a broken machine in a culture that only valued utility. I had to look into my husband's increasingly empty eyes every single day, and realize that to him, I was not a partner, but an unresolved problem occupying his house. Today, I live in a world where the houses have electricity, and the windows open to streets I chose myself. Years have passed since that November afternoon at the clothesline, but the echo of that silence still follows me. I left the community with one small suitcase and a body that felt like a battlefield. Levi and I never spoke again. The system simply closed ranks around him, replaced me with a woman who could fulfill the contract, and erased my name from the ledger. My relationship with my family remains a casualty of that departure, a ghost of polite, strained phone calls across a boundary they cannot cross. But my body is finally my own. It is no longer a report card, a courtroom, or a failed production facility. The deep truth I had to learn, and the one the system fights hardest to hide, is that your worth cannot be calculated by what you produce for others. True belonging doesn't come with conditions written in someone else's handwriting, and it never requires you to destroy your own soul just to keep your seat at the table. If this story brought a physical weight to your chest, if you recognize the invisible architecture of a system that only values you when you are useful, I am asking you to write just one word in the comments below. Name the consequence you have been carrying in secret, whether it is isolation, guilt, or silence. Let this comment section become the record they tried to prevent us from keeping. Please subscribe for our weekly stories. And tell me, have you ever had to choose between losing the people you love or losing yourself completely?